Today I'm testing out this Gouache Studio palette. I've heard lots of good things, so we're going to put it to the test. So hello, if you're new to my channel, my name is Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist and I use a lot of mixed media in my work. So I talk a lot about supplies on my channel and I use them, I'll review them, and today I'm really excited to be trying these out. So they are dried pans. Usually I use gouache in tubes. I have tried to create my own gouache palette here on the channel before, which didn't really work. They all cracked, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this fares. As I said, I have heard good things. I've heard that it's very, very bright, so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to swatch them in my sketchbook and then create an illustration using them. So I'm really excited to give this a go. Let's see what the 15 Gouache Studio palette by Caran is all about. Okay, so here it is, a little closer look at the Caran 15 Gouache Studio palette. So this says that they are gouache in cakes, so little pans of it, and there is a brush included. So I'm going to open this up. Now this is quite heavy, so it wouldn't necessarily be something you take on location, although I do like that it's all in one. So you definitely could if you didn't want to pack lightweight. I do like that it is all here. The way that I use gouache currently is usually in tubes. So similar to this white one, I tend to use Daler-Rowney or Winsor & Newton gouache. I've got a video all about my favourite supplies which went up last week, so I'll leave a link to that in the cards. So you get a little sheet and some stickers. I do like that you've got this really big space here for mixing, so really big palette space there. I like that, and you've got 5 sections sort of marked out. I do like the feel of this as well. This doesn't feel very plasticky. It feels like it's been recycled. It's quite matte. And then this is the brush that comes with it. This is a size 8 round brush. So I'll use that to swatch just because it comes with it. So you get 14 colours in the gouache pans, or cakes as they call it, and then a tube of the white, which is 10ml. I bought this on sale, so I got this in the Black Friday sales from Cass Art. Normally this retails at this price, so I'll leave this on screen. I did pay less for this, so I'm keen to see how it works. It's been on my radar for a while after a few patrons said that they really enjoyed it. And when it was on sale, I thought it was a good chance for me to give it a go. So we're going to start with swatching these in my sketchbook. I'll be swatching them just in my Strathmore Mixed Media sketchbook, and then I also want to do some mixing. Some of the feedback that I've heard is that it's really, really bright, so obviously this isn't my kind of green, so I want to do some testing and mixing to see what colours we can get. I'll talk through the swatching and then we will move on to actually creating a piece of art in my sketchbook using these colours. This is the last full spread in my sketchbook because on the next page we've got some swatches and then it's the end of the sketchbook. So next week I'll be doing a sketchbook tour of this one. But it does mean that there's some paint on this. It's a bit bashed up. You might be able to see where I've pressed on from the other side where I was painting with mixed media. I'm definitely going to show you the colours and let's get swatching. We'll start from the top and then work our way along and then onto the bottom row. I'm going to take them out just so we can see. So they're not super thick. You can buy these individually though, so I do like that. If there's some that I use more than others, I'll be able to replace them one by one. This one says it's 240. There's no actual colour names for this one, but this looks like a cool yellow. And I'm just using the brush that came with it. Oh, it's really pigmented. So I have tried to use gouache dried before in my own palette that I set up previously, and I found it really cracked and didn't really work very well. This definitely feels like gouache. I think because of the way that it looks in the pans, I was just instantly expecting it to feel more like watercolour, but of course it is gouache, it is sold as gouache, so I can really make that more translucent with more water and then much more opaque when I'm using less. Okay, onto the warmer yellow now. I'm going to see just how thick and opaque I can get it. So because it is obviously going to be a little bit more watery than if you were using straight from the tube. When I re-wet my gouache on the palette, so I do use tear-off palettes in my work, and I will squeeze out tubes of paint onto there, and then the next day I'll reuse it. So it's a bit more similar in that way, though I definitely think it's much more opaque than that, where I do have to use quite a lot of water. I'm really impressed with how much pigment I'm getting up from these. So this yellow was number 10. I'm not sure if telling you the numbers will help, but I'll do it just in case. So next up is number 60, and this looks like a warm red. Oh yeah, that one's really nice. That's a lovely red. Definitely warm toned. I do really like that these pans can come out and they clip really securely back into the case that they're in. Then we have number 80. This looks like a more cherry red. Yeah, again, the pigments are really, really strong on all of these. Caran Gouache was the first I'd ever used, actually. I think I still have some in my box somewhere. But like I say, I do tend to use De La Rowney or Winsor & Newton, but I am really impressed with these. Actually, as the other red is drying, it's looking a much more orange tone now, especially when I compare it to this one. So to me, this now reads orange, so I don't know if it's just me now that I've put down this actual cherry sort of red, but maybe there's more of a drying shift there, so I'll make a note of that and see if that happens again. The next colour we have is number 90. Oh no, this one looks more pink than it looked in the pan, which looked quite maroon, so actually it might be a little bit tricky knowing what colours you're grabbing if you don't have a swatch page to reference. So I always recommend swatching colours out, because yeah, it definitely can look quite different when you're using them compared to drying the palette. I'm getting a bit messy here, but that's a really vibrant, very fluorescent pink. Okay, this is our next one. This one is number 120. This is a good example because I have no idea what colour this is. So let's see. Ooh, okay, yes, a very rich purple. First I thought it was blue, but yeah, that's definitely purple. And so you're seeing very primary sort of, I would say rudimentary colours. So very bright, very primary based, which makes sense when you've got a palette like this, but I'm really looking forward to doing some tests and swatching to see if we can make them a bit more muted for my landscapes and my nature work. Then we have 140, which I'm presuming is a blue. Oh yes, more like a ultramarine blue there. I do like how this reacts with water, as expected with gouache. I do like how pigmented this is. Okay, we're on to the second row now, and this one is number 170. So that was a warm blue, and this one is definitely much cooler. That's very nice. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I do tend to use a bit more of the ultramarine, especially for skies, but it is helpful to have warm and cool in this palette. With this many colours, you would expect it. So the next one is number 180. Oh, this is a nice green. This is more of an emerald sort of turquoise. So far, I think they're drying the same colour that they go down. Now onto the greens. So it looks like we're starting with a cool green. Oh yeah, very, very sort of unnatural. I would say this isn't my kind of green at all. I don't tend to see this green much in nature, but it is a good starting green so that we can adjust it with some reds just to make it a bit more natural, which I'll show in a minute. Okay, onto a yellow green, which is more my kind of green, but let's see how bright this is. This one's number 230. Oh yeah, I do like that. It's more like a fresh sort of spring green. Again, I prefer more olivey ones, so we can see how we adjust this one, but I do like that one much more than the cooler green. You can definitely see how bright these are. Then we have number 35, which looks like an ochre. It's taking a bit of time to dry where I've used a bit more water. Ooh, that one's very nice. That one feels very opaque. Yeah, you can see a bit less of the brush marks in that one. Really like this one. That might be one of my favourites. Then we have a brown. This one is 059. Ooh, yeah, you can see just how pigmented that is and how opaque that one is. Let's wash that out a little bit. That's very nice. Like that brown a lot. So that's a warm toned orangey brown. And then the last of the browns, number 009. Oh, okay, that is black. Actually, that makes sense that there's a black here. I was expecting a cooler brown, but that is, yeah, definitely black. And I can soften that out to a grey. I will swatch the white. It won't show up on this paper, but I want to feel the consistency from the tube. So I'm just going to squeeze a bit onto my brush. That feels nice. Standard gouache. Okay, so those are all of our colours. Let's do some mixing now. Okay, so I've taken up a bit more space than I expected here, but I am going to use this gap at the bottom just to do some mixing. Yeah, these are very, very bright. Definitely not my natural sort of landscape palette that I would tend to use, but we're going to mix them up. So I really want to play with this green. So that's this one. Nope, this is the turquoise. It was this green. So this is where it can be a little bit hard to tell compared to the tubes which have the colour on them. I did get a tip about this when you're getting beading on your palette. You can either use toothpaste or you can rub something on it. I'll leave the name to that on screen, but it's not really an issue for me right now. Let's add some of this orange in. And I do want to try and keep, adding a bit more of that orange brings it a bit darker than the brown that comes in. So let's add in a bit of that green back. Ooh, I like that. I'll just get a close-up of that. There's a bit of glare there, but that's more like a foresty green, so that's really nice. And then I could add a bit of yellow to that. I'm trying to wash my brush between the shades, but they're still getting a little bit dirty, obviously, where I'm going back and forth. Oh yes, see, that's my kind of green. You can just see that touch of red takes the edge off this one. The more water I'm using, the more it does feel like watered down gouache. Let's play around with this ochre as well. Maybe with a bit of that pink. Oh yeah, I like that. That creates a soft sort of orange, similar to the ochre. So down here, I think I'm just going to sort of create my own sort of palette. And hopefully this will show you how you can use really bright colours. Obviously it's all about colour theory, so using the complementary colours. So the opposite to green on the colour wheel is red, so adding a touch of that will neutralise things. So this is really nice. This feels a bit more natural. Let's see what we can do with that purple. And because it is gouache, I can leave this on here and re-wet it. So let's see what happens when I add a bit of yellow. Okay, so we're getting more of a brown. That's a bit of a gross kind of brown. I wonder what happens if I use a cool yellow. And a warm blue. Oh yeah, that's nice. Again, a cooler green. So that used the base green here. So this one. Whereas this green I've mixed up without using that green at all, which was the purple, the ultramarine, and then the yellow. So lots of options. I'm really liking these colours down here. I'll probably use these. I don't tend to use these kind of colours in my work, so I'll end up using these more and mixing my own colours. But I do really like that it's all here, it's all in pans. I do think that I will take this plein air next summer so I can play around with doing this on location, because it would be way easier than taking a tear-off palette and wet tubes. Oh yes, so that's made it really, really opaque. So I think some of these are more opaque than others, though they do all seem to have a really good pigment ratio. And there's definitely plenty of space on this palette. I am definitely expecting my pans to get messy and dirty, but the beauty is you can clean them off. You just need a wet brush, and then you sort of just take off the top layer and clean it again. So it's not the end of the world if you do get a dirty palette, especially with these gouache and also with watercolour. You can just sort of clean it up as you go. Let's try this white. I want to mix a nice sky blue with the tiny amount of space I've got left on this page. So that's the ultramarine. Definitely my kind of soft blue. And I have squeezed out too much here. Again, not a problem because it is gouache, so it can be re-wet. Oh yeah, so this cooler blue has created quite a different sky blue there. A bit more of a summery blue. This one feels a bit more like a wintry sky blue. But again, because I've used that white from the tube, that is much more opaque. Maybe I'll just mix some more green. So I'll use that there with a bit of this spring green. And then where I've made that, that's quite neon here, you can see. Although it's a nice sort of pastel green. If I then mix it in with a bit of the orange above, probably too much, but yeah, you can get a really big range here. So I do think this palette has lots and lots of options, lots of opportunities. So I tend to work like this. I'll create colours on my palette and then re-wet, remix things in. That's very nice. So this does have a bit of a chalky feel to it because I did use some of that white gouache that was already on the palette. But yeah, this is definitely my kind of thing. So hopefully that's shown you how you can take colours like this and make it work for you. And you might prefer these brighter colours, but I personally prefer more natural palettes. So I really like that. They mix beautifully, haven't had any issues there. You can see some of my brush strokes here where I did add water. I think this wouldn't necessarily work on Royal Talons depending on how much water you're loading it on, but certainly from a mixed media sketchbook like this, and this is cotton paper, it works fine. So I'm going to film the process for a landscape that I'm going to paint on here using all of these colours. Again, it won't look like this. I'm going to use this sort of palette, so much more natural and much more my vibe, and I'll talk you through the process. So I think swatching is really helpful to know our colours and tones, but I do think that applying them to an actual painting can be quite different. So that's why I wanted to include the process here. And yeah, it's definitely like watered down gouache, so it's not going to be, like I said, as thick as out the tube. So you're not necessarily going to have the opacity unless you mix it in with the white, which can obviously make your colours a bit more pastel or a bit more chalky. So I did realise on the packaging it does say it's a watercolour gouache sort of hybrid, and that definitely makes a lot of sense. So it is definitely an in-between. It reminds me a little bit of the Kuretake pans, but probably maybe even a bit less opaque than those. So I do think that watercolour is probably a bit more accurate. I do really like the pigment payoff though, so in contrast to watercolour you get that intensity straight away, so I didn't have to, build it up. You can obviously wash it out with more water, but I do really like you get that intense colour first, so for me, I really like that. I think if you're going into this thinking it will be the same opacity and thickness as tubed gouache, then you might be disappointed. But if you do use them, and if you're used to sort of re-wetting the gouache that you've already got on your palette, then I would say this is definitely that. So liken it more to that texture rather than from the tube. So you can see here where I'm layering things up, I did definitely use a lot of that mixing space to try and get the colours that I wanted. I do hope it was helpful to see how I mix, because yeah, I definitely find that I tend to make like a base green and then I'll mix in loads of different colours, which I think does help make your landscapes very cohesive, and any of your colour palettes, if you're continually mixing the colours together, it's similar to when you have a mother colour and then you adjust that throughout. So that's how I mix, and again with gouache you can re-wet it, so it's very helpful, and it just means you continually sort of mix things up, and that's why this landscape has quite an earthy feel. So the overall vibe of this one is quite muted and earthy, but I really like that. You'll see here where the colour mixed into the water, so you do have to be careful when it is still wet because that will happen, but I'll cover that up later without any issues. So I do really like how these layer, obviously because they are watered down, they layer really nicely, but I do like how they mix together. I definitely think it depends on the paper, so it didn't sink in immediately on this one, so I would say watercolour or mixed media paper is your best bet. But here's a good example, so you can see it's layering straight on top of that now that it's dried, and it does feel like highly pigmented watercolour there, because it's not going to be like thick paint, but it definitely does still have that coverage. So on this one I am just creating lots and lots of texture. I'm using the brush that it came with, which is a little bit smaller than I usually use, but it was fine for this. And this is a good example where I've mixed in the white, so you can see that's acting a little bit more like the gouache, I know, but I still watered it down a bit, and yeah, I just mixed up so many greens. This is obviously a very green landscape, but I do really like how it turned out. It feels very me. Probably a little bit less detail than I'd have liked. I was really trying to use this paint for most of the painting, but you'll see later on I do come in with a few other materials just to finish this one off. I think it will be really interesting to take this plein air. Like I said earlier, it is quite heavy, but I do think that it's handy to have in this palette, so I can just literally take this palette, take some water and create what's in front of me. So definitely something that I'm going to try and film in the spring summer, because if you saw my urban sketching from the other day, you'll know I was really cold, but I definitely want to do some more outside adventures with my art next year in 2026. So here I am coming in with my various pots of pencils, starting with Luminance pencils, and then I will use a touch of Neocolor as well. This wasn't necessarily needed, but I do like it for darkening some areas, adding extra texture, and for example here where I'm adding on the lines to the house, I just think it feels a little bit more finished when I add this on. But for example over here on the trees, just adding more and more texture on top. Everything layers on top fine, it's just like you would go on top with watercolour, so no issues there. I just find that adding this contrast does help, But I could of course have come in with another layer of paint, that wouldn't have been an issue. I just prefer the sort of control I can get with pencils and these pastels. So of course my Neocolor II is coming in here just to go on top of some of the colour. When I added on those purple flowers, that was with white mixed with the purple colour. So again, that worked well and it did layer on top, mostly because of the opacity that was created using the white, so it was way more opaque. But you can definitely layer these up in that way, so it does feel quite versatile. I do like that you can add lots and lots of water for washes, or you can use them a little bit thicker, especially with the white, to make them more opaque. So I'm just doing final touches here in the sky, adding in a bit more texture and a little bit more interest and movement, and finishing off with some brighter pops. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun trying this out. Definitely going to be using it when I want to have a really easy option for mediums. So when I'm feeling a bit lazy and maybe don't want to get all my tubes out, this is going to be great to just grab and go. So thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to my patrons for their support. Without them I wouldn't be able to make these YouTube videos, and I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, whether you enjoyed the mixing segment and want to know more, or if you have this palette yourself. I hope you have a lovely week, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!